James Carter, a billionaire CEO, was seconds from boarding a flight to seal the deal of his life when he found a crying 4-year-old girl, Emma, in his first-class seat, clutching a letter with his name. It was from Sarah, his ex, revealing Emma was his daughter, a secret he never knew. Torn between a billion-dollar merger and a child he just met, James faces a choice that could unravel everything. Why was Emma left alone on that plane? As he dives into fatherhood, a custody battle threatens to tear them apart, exposing a system stacked against him. Can a man who's conquered boardrooms win the heart of the little girl who needs him most? One decision changes his world forever. James Carter's life was a machine, every gear polished to perfection. As the CEO of a Seattle tech empire, he thrived on control. Schedules mapped to the minute, deals closed with surgical precision. His latest triumph, a merger that would reshape the industry, awaited him in London. He strode through the private lounge at Seattle Tacoma International Airport, his tailored suit sharp, his mind locked on the billions at stake. His assistant had secured everything: first-class seat 9A, his tablet loaded with data, his focus unbreakable. Emotions were a luxury he didn't afford. Success was his only currency. But the machine jammed when he reached his seat. A girl, maybe 4, sat curled in 9A, sobbing into a stuffed rabbit. Her curly brown hair was a mess, her sweater too big, her tiny feet bare except for mismatched socks. Her hazel eyes, red from tears, met his and James froze. This wasn't part of the plan. The cabin hummed with the low buzz of boarding, but her quiet cries cut through it, sharp and disorienting. A flight attendant rushed over, her voice tight with apology. "Mr. Carter, we're so sorry. She's not on the manifest. We don't know how she got here." James's first instinct was to step back, demand a fix, and move on. He had a deal to close, a legacy to cement. But the girl, Emma, as he'd soon learned, clutched a folded piece of paper, his name scrawled in green marker, James Carter. His pulse quickened. He sat in 9B, ignoring the attendant's assurances that security was coming. The paper trembled in his hand as he opened it. The handwriting was uneven, familiar, a ghost from a life he'd buried. Sarah, his college love, the woman whose fire had once matched his own, until he chose ambition over her. The letter was brief, each word a weight. "James, I'm sorry. Her name is Emma. She's yours. I couldn't keep going. You have everything. Please, don't let her go." The words didn't compute. A daughter. He hadn't seen Sarah in years, hadn't known she'd had a child, his child. He stared at Emma. Her face flushed, her rabbit pressed tight against her chest. The resemblance hit him like a punch. His mother's eyes, his own stubborn jaw. She was his, undeniably, and she was alone. The flight attendant hovered, explaining the chaos. No guardian listed, no check-in record, just a boarding pass for 9A and a letter. The airline's system had failed, letting a child slip through without question, a glaring flaw in a world obsessed with protocol. James should have been furious at the oversight, but anger felt distant. Something deeper stirred. Guilt, maybe? Or a flicker of the loneliness he'd buried under boardroom victories. He thought of Sarah, her laugh, her fierce independence, the way she'd challenged him to be more than his ambitions. They'd parted when his career took off, his focus narrowing to power and profit. She'd faded from his life, and he'd let her, assuming she'd moved on. Now, her words echoed, "I couldn't keep going." What had happened to her? Why leave Emma like this on a plane with only a note and a stranger's name? The questions churned, but Emma's quiet sniffles pulled him back. Her eyes searched his, not with fear, but with a desperate need for something, someone, to hold on to. The crew urged him to move, offering another seat, promising answers. Security was minutes away, social services on call. Protocol demanded he step aside, let the system handle it, but James couldn't. The deal in London, the billions, the headlines, they blurred into noise. Emma's hand, small and trembling, brushed his sleeve, and he felt it, a connection he hadn't known he was missing. His life, so full of triumphs, had been empty in ways he'd never faced. The penthouse with its skyline view, the awards lining his office, they meant nothing compared to the weight of this moment. He stood, ignoring the attendant's protests, and knelt beside Emma. "Hey," he said softly, his voice unsteady. "I'm James. What's your bunny's name?" She blinked, clutching the rabbit tighter. "Flopsy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. It was the first crack in the wall between them. James's throat tightened. He didn't know how to be a father, didn't know what Emma needed, but he knew he couldn't walk away. Not from her, not from this. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing final boarding. James's phone buzzed, his assistant no doubt checking his status. The merger loomed, a ticking clock. But Emma's hand rested on Flopsy, her sobs quieter now, and James made a choice. He lifted her gently, rabbit and all, and walked back through the gate. The terminal stretched before him, a crossroads he hadn't expected. Social services would come, questions would pile up, but for now, he carried Emma, her warmth against his chest, and headed toward a future he couldn't predict. As they left the airport, James glanced at the letter again, Sarah's words searing his mind. "You have everything." She was wrong. He'd had nothing real, not until now. But could he be what Emma needed? The system's failure had brought her to him, but it wouldn't let him keep her easily. And somewhere, a man named Michael was about to claim she belonged to him instead. James tightened his grip on Emma, stepping into the unknown, driven by a truth he was only beginning to understand. Some deals were worth walking away from. James Carter didn't look back as he carried Emma out of Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, her small body nestled against his shoulder, Flopsy the rabbit dangling from her hand. The merger in London, the billions on the line, faded like a signal lost in static. His driver raised an eyebrow, but said nothing as James gave an address he hadn't spoken in years, his grandmother's old house in Ravenna, a quiet Seattle neighborhood where memories of childhood summers lingered. The decision to skip the flight wasn't logical, it was instinctive, driven by the weight of Sarah's letter and the hazel eyes that mirrored his own. But as he stepped into the unknown, James felt the ground shift beneath him. He wasn't just a CEO anymore, he was something he'd never imagined, a father. The Ravenna house greeted them with the scent of dust and time. Its creaky floors and faded curtains felt like a portal to a life James had left behind. He set Emma on a sagging couch, her silence louder than any cry. She clutched Flopsy, her gaze darting to every corner as if expecting something or someone to appear. James had no idea where to start. Did she need food? A nap? He rummaged through the pantry, finding only stale crackers and a jar of peanut butter. He tried warming milk in a chipped mug, but it scorched, filling the kitchen with a burnt smell. Emma wrinkled her nose, and James laughed, a raw, clumsy sound. "Okay, kid, I'm new at this," he said. Her lips twitched, a hint of a smile, and for a moment, the tension eased. That night, Emma woke screaming, her cries piercing the quiet house. James stumbled to her side, heart racing, and found her curled into a ball, Flopsy pressed to her chest. "Mommy," she whimpered, the word a knife in James's gut. He didn't know how to comfort her, didn't know what nightmares haunted her, but he sat on the floor beside the guest bed, humming a half-remembered lullaby. Emma's sobs slowed, and her tiny hand reached for his, her fingers sticky from a juice box. The touch was fragile, tentative, but it anchored him. For the first time, James felt the stirrings of a bond he hadn't earned, but desperately wanted. Sarah's letter haunted him. I couldn't keep going. What had broken her? James remembered her as fierce, unbreakable, a woman who laughed in the face of hardship. But the letter hinted at a darker truth. Social services, when they arrived the next morning, filled in fragments. Sarah had been a single mother, scraping by in a crumbling apartment in South Seattle. She'd worked double shifts, juggled bills, and fought to keep Emma fed, all while the system offered little more than overworked caseworkers and endless wait lists. Society had turned its back, leaving her to drown in desperation. Her choice to leave Emma on that plane wasn't abandonment. It was a final act of love, a plea for her daughter to have a chance Sarah couldn't give. James's throat tightened with guilt. He'd been building an empire while Sarah struggled, and he hadn't even known. The next day, James took Emma to a store in University Village, her hand small but firm in his. He bought her sneakers, a jacket, a backpack with sparkly stars. She stayed close, flinching when strangers passed, her silence a reminder of the wounds she carried. At the checkout, she pointed to a pack of crayons, her eyes pleading. James added them to the cart, and later, at the kitchen table, she drew a picture. 2 stick figures, one tall, one small, holding hands. "That's you," she whispered, pointing to the taller one. James's chest ached. He taped the drawing to the fridge, a fragile promise, taking root. Emma was shy, her words few, but her actions spoke. When James burned toast, she giggled. When he fumbled with her shoelaces, she patted his hand, as if reassuring him. These moments, small and unpolished, were stitching them together. But James knew this was just the beginning. Sarah's absence loomed, and the system that had failed her was watching him now. Emma's past held scars he couldn't yet see, and somewhere, a man named Michael was waiting to claim her. James looked at the crayon drawing, Emma's tiny handprint beside it, and vowed to be more than a name on a letter. He'd be her father, no matter what it cost. James Carter was learning Emma one clumsy step at a time. The Ravenna house, once a silent relic, now hummed with the chaos of a 4-year-old. Mornings were a blur of mismatched socks and spilled cereal, James fumbling through routines he'd never imagined. He mastered pigtails, barely, after watching online tutorials, though Emma giggled at his lopsided attempts. Her laughter, rare but bright, was a lifeline, pulling him deeper into a role he was still shaping. He took her to Ravenna Park, pushing her on swings, her squeals cutting through his guarded heart. Each moment with her felt like a stitch in a wound he hadn't known was there. He enrolled Emma in a preschool near the park, a cozy building with colorful murals. The paperwork overwhelmed him. Health forms, emergency contacts, questions about allergies he couldn't answer. The teachers were warm but curious, their smiles tinged with skepticism. A billionaire CEO as a single dad? The neighborhood buzzed with whispers. At the grocery store, eyes lingered when James pushed Emma's cart, her unicorn backpack bouncing. "Is she his niece?" a cashier murmured. "No way a guy like that raises a kid," another replied. The judgment stung, rooted in a stereotype that wealth disqualified him from care. James ignored it, but the weight of their doubt settled in his bones. He wasn't just fighting to be Emma's father. He was fighting a world that assumed he couldn't be. Maria, the social worker, became a regular visitor. Young, with sharp eyes and a calm voice, she observed everything. Emma's drawings on the fridge, James's awkward attempts at bedtime stories. She praised his efforts, but probed deeper. "Why now, Mr. Carter? You didn't know Emma existed. Can you really step away from your world for hers?" Her questions weren't cruel, but they cut. James admitted his absence in Sarah's life. The years he'd chosen deals over love. "I didn't know," he said, voice low. "But I'm here now. She's not a project. She's my daughter." Maria nodded, jotting notes. But the system she represented was skeptical, built to doubt men like him, rich, detached, untested. The truth about Sarah unraveled slowly, each piece a shard in James's guilt. Maria shared what she'd learned. Sarah had lived in a crumbling apartment in South Seattle, juggling 2 jobs, waitressing and cleaning houses. She'd fought to keep Emma in daycare, to pay rent, to buy shoes that fit. But the system offered little. Underfunded programs, caseworkers too busy to care. Single mothers like Sarah were invisible, left to sink under the weight of poverty. James pictured her. Once vibrant, now worn down, her pride eroded by a society that failed her. He'd been closing billion-dollar deals while she counted pennies, and the contrast burned. Why hadn't he reached out? Why hadn't he known? One evening, Emma sat at the kitchen table, crayons scattered. She'd been quiet all day, her eyes distant. James knelt beside her, offering a sliced apple, her favorite. She pushed a drawing toward him, 2 stick figures under a lopsided sun, the taller one with a tie. "That's you, Daddy?" she said, her voice soft but certain. The word "Daddy" hit like a wave, melting the walls he'd built around his heart. He pulled her into a hug, her small arms wrapping around his neck, and for a moment, the world was just them. "I love it, kid," he whispered, taping the picture next to her first. Her smile, shy but real, was worth more than any merger. That night, James sat alone, Sarah's letter in hand. He remembered their last fight years ago outside a coffee shop in Capitol Hill. She'd wanted a life together. He'd wanted success. "You'll regret this," she'd said, tears in her eyes. He'd walked away, assuming she'd be fine. Now he saw the cost of his choice, not just for him, but for her, for Emma. The guilt was a quiet ache, but it fueled him. He couldn't change the past, but he could be here now, for every drawing, every giggle, every nightmare. The community's judgment grew louder. At a preschool event, parents whispered about his wealth, his motives. "He's just guilty," one said. "He'll get bored and leave her," another added. The stereotype clung to him, a rich man incapable of love. James didn't argue. He showed up to school drop-offs, to park playdates, to the store where Emma picked out a new jacket. But the whispers weren't his only challenge. Maria hinted at a new complication, a man named Michael, Sarah's ex, claiming he'd been Emma's caregiver. He wanted her back. James looked at Emma, asleep with Flopsy, her crayon drawing glowing under the fridge's light. He'd fight for her, not as a CEO, but as a father. The world could doubt him, but he wouldn't doubt himself. Not anymore. The Ravenna house had become James Carter's world, its walls alive with Emma's laughter and crayon marks. But that world trembled when a lawyer's letter arrived, delivered to the doorstep like a grenade. Michael Reed, Sarah's ex-boyfriend, was filing for custody of Emma, claiming he'd been her anchor when Sarah's life unraveled. A contractor from Tacoma, Michael painted himself as the steady hand Emma needed, not a billionaire who'd stumbled into fatherhood. The case was set for King County Courthouse, and James felt the ground slip beneath him. He'd learned to braid Emma's hair, to soothe her nightmares. But now, he had to prove he was her father, not just in his heart, but in a courtroom that didn't trust men like him. The courthouse loomed, its gray facade as unyielding as the system inside. James sat on a worn bench, his suit feeling heavier than usual, his lawyer beside him. Across the room, Michael waited, his flannel shirt and calloused hands a stark contrast to James's polished exterior. The judge, a woman with a no-nonsense gaze, called the hearing to order. Michael's lawyer struck first, his voice sharp. "Mr. Carter was absent for Emma's entire life," he said. "He's a CEO, not a caregiver. His wealth can't replace the bond Michael built when Sarah needed help." The words landed like blows, framing James as an outsider, his penthouse lifestyle a mark against him. The court seemed to lean toward Michael, a working-class man who fit the mold of relatable, while James's success was twisted into a flaw. The system's bias was subtle but real. Family courts often favored those who seemed grounded, rooted in community, not men who lived in glass towers. James's wealth, his tailored suits, his past as a deal-maker, they were liabilities here, proof he didn't belong in Emma's world of scraped knees and bedtime stories. The lawyer dug deeper, questioning his motives. "Is this guilt, Mr. Carter, a publicity stunt?" James clenched his jaw, thinking of Emma's drawing on the fridge, her small voice calling him Daddy. This wasn't guilt. It was love, raw and unpolished, but the system wasn't built to measure that. When it was his turn, James stood, no script, just truth. "I didn't know Emma existed until she was crying in my seat," he said, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "I wasn't there for her first words or her first steps. I can't undo that. But I'm here now. I know she loves strawberry yogurt and hides under blankets during storms. I know she hugs me after nightmares, like the one last week when she woke up screaming for her mom. I held her until she fell asleep, and I'd do it every night if she needed me." His voice cracked and he paused, meeting the judge's eyes. "She's not a transaction. She's my daughter." The courtroom was silent, but James felt the weight of every glance. He spoke of Emma's laugh, how it started shy but grew louder each day. He described the morning she ran to him with a new drawing, her pigtails bouncing, her smile brighter than any boardroom victory. These moments, small but sacred, were his evidence, not contracts or bank statements, but the life they were building. Maria, the social worker, backed him, her report detailing Emma's progress, the way she sang to Flopsy, the trust in her eyes when James picked her up from preschool. But Michael's lawyer countered, painting him as Emma's real father figure, there when Sarah struggled. While James was closing deals across the globe, the unfairness of it burned. The system didn't just doubt James, it dismissed the possibility that he could change. It favored Michael's narrative, the everyman who'd stepped in, ignoring how briefly he'd been in Emma's life. Single parents like Sarah faced the same rigidity, judged, boxed in, offered little grace. James thought of her, alone in South Seattle, the system failing her as it now challenged him. He wasn't just fighting for Emma, he was fighting a machine that chewed up those who didn't fit its mold. As the hearing ended, James left the courthouse, rain soaking his coat. He picked Emma up from preschool, her unicorn backpack slung over one shoulder. She ran to him, arms wide, and he knelt, catching her in a hug. "Missed you, Daddy," she said, her voice muffled against his chest. He held her tighter, the fear of losing her a knot in his gut. That night, as she slept, he sat by her bed, watching her breathe, Flopsy tucked under her arm. He'd traded boardrooms for this, her warmth, her trust, and he'd do it again. But the court's bias lingered, a shadow over their fragile bond. Michael's claim wasn't just a threat. It was a reminder that love alone might not be enough. James kissed Emma's forehead, vowing to fight, not for victory, but for her. The King County Courthouse felt like a pressure cooker as James Carter prepared for the final custody hearing. His suit was crisp, but his hands shook as he clutched a folder of Emma's drawings, each one a testament to the life they'd built. The past weeks had been a blur of sleepless nights and quiet moments, Emma's giggles over burnt pancakes, her tiny hand in his at the park. Now it all hung in the balance. Michael Reed, Sarah's ex, sat across the courtroom, his expression unreadable, his lawyer ready to argue that Emma belonged with him. James's heart pounded, not with the adrenaline of a boardroom deal, but with the raw fear of losing the one thing that mattered, his daughter. The judge called for final statements. Michael's lawyer went first, his voice steady, painting Michael as Emma's rock during Sarah's darkest days. "Mr. Carter is a newcomer," he said, driven by guilt, not love. "His wealth can't replace the stability Michael offers." The words stung, but James kept his eyes on the judge, refusing to flinch. When his turn came, he stood, his voice low but firm. "I wasn't there for Emma's first years," he admitted. "I didn't know she existed, but from the moment I saw her, crying in my seat with a letter from her mother, I knew she was mine. Not just by blood, but by heart. I've learned her favorite songs, the way she hides Flopsy when she's scared. I've held her through nightmares, promising she's safe. This isn't about fixing the past. It's about building her future, every single day." He pulled out a drawing Emma had made, a house with a crooked sun, 2 stick figures labeled Daddy and Me. "This is what she wants," he said, his voice catching. "Not my money, not my name, just me." Maria, the social worker, spoke next, her report glowing with Emma's progress. Her confidence, her laughter, the way she ran to James at preschool. A child psychologist echoed her, warning that disrupting Emma's bond with James could unravel her fragile sense of security. But the system wasn't swayed by emotion. It clung to precedent, to Michael's claim of history, however brief. The courtroom's cold logic felt like a betrayal, a machine that couldn't see the love in Emma's crayon lines. The judge's ruling came like a blade, joint custody. Emma would split her time between James and Michael, a compromise meant to serve her but ignoring the home she'd found in James's arms. The room was still, the air heavy with finality. James's lawyer whispered reassurances, but James barely heard. His mind was on Emma, on the nights she'd clung to him, on the trust he'd fought to earn. Joint custody meant splitting her world, shuttling her between 2 lives, 2 fathers. It was a system's answer, not a child's. The rigidity of it burned. Courts claimed to protect kids, yet here they were, prioritizing balance over Emma's heart. James left the courthouse, rain blurring his vision. At preschool, Emma ran to him, her unicorn backpack bouncing. "Daddy," she called, her smile a balm to his raw nerves. He knelt, hugging her tight, her warmth grounding him. That night, after dinner, he found a folded paper in her backpack, her handwriting shaky but clear. "Dear Daddy, I love you. Can we stay together always?" The words broke him. Alone in the kitchen, James cried, tears falling onto the letter. He'd failed to keep her fully, but her love, scribbled in crayon, was worth more than any empire. He made a choice. The next morning, he called his board and resigned as CEO. The company he'd built, the deals he'd chased, they were shadows compared to Emma. He sold his penthouse, redirecting the funds to a trust for her future. When Emma woke, he was there, pouring cereal, tying her shoes, promising to make their time count. They built a fort in the living room, her giggles filling the house, and James memorized every sound. The system's ruling was unfair, blind to Emma's needs, but he wouldn't let it define them. He'd be her father in every moment they had, reading stories, wiping tears, celebrating her small victories. As Emma slept, Flopsy tucked beside her, James sat by her bed, the letter still in his pocket. He'd lost the fight for full custody, but he hadn't lost her. The sacrifice of his career, his old life, was nothing compared to the love she'd given him. The system could split her time, but it couldn't split their bond. He kissed her forehead, whispering, "I'm here, kid, always." And in that quiet vow, he found a strength he'd never known. James Carter's life no longer revolved around boardrooms or billion-dollar deals. The Ravenna house, once a dusty relic, was now a home, its walls adorned with Emma's drawings and its floors scuffed by her sneakers. The court's ruling, joint custody with Michael Reed, had forced a new rhythm, weeks with James, weeks with Michael. It wasn't the life James had fought for, but he refused to let it dim the love he and Emma shared. He poured himself into their time together, determined to make every moment a memory that would hold her heart, no matter where she was. The system had split her time, but James would fill his half with a love that felt whole. Mornings began with Emma's chatter, her voice bright as she named the flowers they'd planted in the backyard. James had turned a corner of the Ravenna garden into her sanctuary, a patch of daisies and sunflowers she called our place. They dug in the dirt together, her small hands patting soil, her giggles rising when a worm wriggled free. James learned to love the mess mud on his jeans, petals in her hair. One afternoon, as they built a birdhouse, Emma handed him a bracelet woven from colorful yarn, her eyes shining. "It's for you, Daddy," she said. "I love you forever." James slipped it on, his throat tight, and pulled her close. "Forever, kid," he whispered. In that moment, he understood. Happiness wasn't owning all of her time. It was being the father she carried in her heart. Emma thrived, her shyness fading into confidence. She called both James and Michael Daddy, a balance that stung James at first, but grew to feel right. She'd returned from Michael's with stories of fishing trips, her backpack stuffed with new drawings. But it was James she ran to with her biggest smiles, her arms wide as she leapt into his hugs. Their bond was unspoken, woven through quiet nights reading about brave rabbits and mornings braiding her hair, still lopsided, but she never complained. Her laughter filled the house, a sound James once thought he'd never know. Yet the system's decision lingered like a shadow. Its rigid fairness had ignored Emma's emotional needs, prioritizing compromise over the stability of one home. James saw Sarah's story in that failure. A mother abandoned by a society too busy to care, her daughter now caught in a legal tug-of-war. The injustice fueled James. He'd walked away from his CEO title, but his influence remained. Inspired by Sarah's struggle, he partnered with a Seattle nonprofit funding legal aid for families trapped in the foster system. He spoke at community centers, sharing Emma's story, not as a billionaire's redemption, but as a father's plea for change. "Kids like Emma deserve better," he told a crowded room in Capitol Hill. "So do parents like her mother, who fought alone." He pushed for reforms, more support for single parents, fairer custody laws, caseworkers with time to listen. Each step was a tribute to Sarah, a way to honor the love that had brought Emma to him. Emma grew, her world expanding. At preschool, she sang in a talent show, her voice wobbly but proud, James clapping louder than anyone. She drew pictures of our place, the garden now blooming with her flowers. One evening, as they planted marigolds, she looked up, her face serious. "Daddy, are you happy?" James paused, dirt under his nails, her bracelet glinting on his wrist. "Yeah, kid," he said. "Because of you." She smiled, and he saw Sarah in her, not the pain, but the fierce love that had shaped her. Emma was happy, not because life was perfect, but because she was loved. Deeply, by a father who stayed. The story didn't end with a tidy bow. Emma's weeks with Michael meant goodbyes that ate, her backpack a reminder of a divided life. But James filled their time with joy. Picnics by Green Lake, forts in the living room, stories under the stars. As they knelt in the garden, planting one last flower, rain misted the air, and Emma leaned against him, Flopsy tucked in her lap. James looked at the marigolds, their petals bright against the earth, and saw what they'd built. Not just a garden, but a love that grew through every storm. The world outside could judge, could doubt, could split their days, but James had learned what mattered. Love was showing up, sacrificing the life he'd known for the one Emma needed. It was the bracelet on his wrist, the drawings on his fridge, the quiet promise to be there always. And as Emma's hand rested in his, James knew he wasn't just her father. He was her home, no matter where she went. That was the legacy Sarah had given him, and he'd carry it forever. This story of James and Emma hits hard because it shows love isn't about perfection. It's about showing up, even when the system fights you. I felt James's struggle, his shift from chasing wealth to cherishing crayon drawings, and it made me question, how often do we prioritize the wrong things? The court's ruling sparked mixed feelings, fairness for Michael, but at what cost to Emma? Some might argue it's balanced. Others, like me, think kids need one steady home. What do you think? Did the system fail Emma, or was joint custody the right call? Share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear your perspective. Thanks for watching and diving into this emotional journey with me. If this story moved you, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more stories that challenge the heart and mind. Let's keep the conversation going.